May I request everyone to kindly settle down. Though Geetanjali Shree's novel in Hindi, Ret Samadhi, was published in 2018, the glare of publicity fell on her with the Booker Prize for the English translation Tomb of Sand by Daisy Rockwell in 2022. The tale is of an octogenarian woman who rises from depression to fly in the face of convention and break across borders and boundaries. In conversation with author Tanuj Solanki, Geetanjali Shree and Daisy Rockwell discuss the nuances of language, translation, prizes, and fame. Tanuj Solanki's new novel, Manji Mayhem, has been called the Indian Noir at its finest. His novel, The Machine is Learning, was longlisted for the JCB Prize for Literature in 2020. In 2019, he was awarded the Sahitya Akademi Yuva Puraskar for his short story collection, Diwali in Muzaffarnagar. Daisy Rockwell is a New England-based artist and translator of Hindi and Urdu literature. In 2022, she won the International Booker Prize along with author Geetanjali Shree for her translation of Shree's Hindi novel, Tomb of Sand. Geetanjali Shree has received various awards for her contribution to Hindi literature. The French translation of her novel, Ret Samadhi, was shortlisted for the Emile Guimet Prize 2021, and the English translation won the International Booker Prize 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our esteemed guests, Geetanjali Shree, Daisy Rockwell, and Tanuj Solanki, Ret Samadhi, Tomb of Sand.
First of all, a big thanks to JLF for making this possible, and a warm welcome to everyone who's here. आज का सेशन हिंदी, इंग्लिश, हिंदी सभी में होने की संभावना है, और रेत समाधि और टूम ऑफ सैंड की बात हो तो शायद थोड़ा सही भी है. रेत समाधि में मिसाल के तौर पे एक सेंटेंस आपको मिलेगा, सब वेलकमिंगली बुलाते हैं तो हैप्पीली चला आता हूँ. वैसे ही टूम ऑफ सैंड में आपको हिंदी के शब्द मिल सकते हैं, मिसाल के तौर पे जलेबी. तो मैं सबसे पहले अभी आज शुरू करता हूँ गीतांजलि जी आपके साथ. रेत समाधि में एक माँ है, एक बेटी है और एक बेटा भी है. करीबन 30 साल पहले आई थिंक आपका एक उपन्यास माई पब्लिश हुआ. वहाँ पे भी एक माँ, एक बेटी और एक बेटा. बेटी माई में जो बेटी है सुनैना, वो एक जगह कहती है, मैं माई जो मेरा आदर्श नहीं, जो वह है जो मुझे नहीं बनना, के आगे माथा टेक देती हूँ. आप ही झुक जाती हूँ उस अथाह कमज़ोरी के आगे जिसने मुझ ताकतवर को आड़ दी. तो मेरा पहला सवाल ये है कि ये अथाह कमज़ोरी जो है, ये जो भारत में माँ को जकड़े हुए है, जिससे बेटी लड़ जाती है, और फिर माँ भी 60 के बाद या 70 के बाद एक तरीके से इस कमज़ोरी को ध्वस्त करती है. ये अथाह कमज़ोरी क्या है? जो
शुक्रिया तनुज. आप सबको देख के बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है और उम्मीद है कि आज की बातें आपको अच्छी लगेंगी. देखिए, आप ये जो माई की बात कर रहे हैं, थोड़ा मुझको याद करना पड़ेगा. काफ़ी पहले की किताब है, मेरी पहली किताब है, लेकिन जो फ़ौरन जो मुझे चीज़ सूझ रही है वो ये कि अथाह कमज़ोरी क्या वाकई अथाह कमज़ोरी है? वो बेटी माँ के चुप रहने को, झुक के काम करने को, दूसरों के लिए हर तरह से सुविधा जुटाने को एक ख़ास तरह से देखती है. तो ये बेटी की नज़र है कि ये अथाह कमज़ोरी है. उपन्यास तो मेरी समझ से इस नज़र को में खोट देखता है और दिखाता है, और उपन्यास के ख़त्म होते होते इस स्टीरियोटाइप को एक तरह से पंक्चर हम कर देते हैं, पाठक भी और लेखक भी, कि ये जो हमने मान लिया है कि ये सब मानक हैं अथाह कमज़ोरी के, ये हमारी अपनी कोई देखने की सीमा है। क्या वो माँ वाकई इतनी कमज़ोर है? मुझे लगता है नहीं। वो एक ख़ास तरह की भूमिका में है, सामाजिक भूमिका में है, उसको ज़्यादा यहाँ पे तवज्जो दिया गया है। उस भूमिका में वो खुद जो है वो बात उतनी सामने नहीं आती है जितनी उसका दूसरों के लिए मेहनत करना, दूसरों की सांसों को चलाना। ये मुझे मालूम है, मैंने ये वाक्य बाद में रेत समाधि में भी इस्तेमाल किया है। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये अथाह कमज़ोरी नहीं है, उसके भीतर क्या क्या है वो हमको नहीं पता है। और दूसरी चीज़ है कि जितना वो समझती है, जितना वो दूसरों को समझती है, जितना वो जीवन को समझती है, जितनी उसमें हमदर्दी है, जिसको कहते हैं नॉलेज इज़ पावर, अवेयरनेस हैज़ स्ट्रेंथ, तो उसकी तो ताकत यहाँ है। और ये बात हम लोगों को समझने की ज़रूरत उस पुस्तक में मुझे भी महसूस हुई, शायद उसके किरदारों को भी महसूस हुई।
जी बिल्कुल। रेत समाधि में भी एक तरह की कमज़ोरी अम्मा में है शुरुआत में, पर धीरे धीरे वो उसको ध्वस्त करती हुई चलती हैं, और पार्ट 2 में तो वो कमज़ोरी ख़त्म होती है। पहले एक बचपन आता है, फिर एक जवानी आती है।
अब फिर आप आमादा हैं इस बात पर कि आप उसको कमज़ोरी कहेंगे। मैं उसको कमज़ोरी नहीं कह रही हूँ। वो कमज़ोरी नहीं है, वो अपने भीतर अपनी आग रखे हुए है जिस भी कारण से। और रेत समाधि में ये ज़रूर करती है, वो लेखक की दिलचस्पी थी या इस किरदार की दिलचस्पी थी कि उसमें वो उठती है और बाहर निकल के कुछ चीज़ें करती है। लेकिन हम क्यों समझते हैं कि जो बाहर निकल के उठ के चीज़ें कर रही है वही ताकतवर है, और जो चुपचाप अंदर बैठ के बिना सर ज़्यादा उठाए या किसी से खुले में झगड़ा करके जो चीज़ें कर रही है वो कमज़ोर है। मुझे लगता है कि ये जो बाइनरी बनी हुई है, इसी को ये दोनों पुस्तकें तोड़ देती हैं।
जी बिल्कुल। डेजी, अगला सवाल आपसे। यू हैव ट्रांसलेटेड उपेंद्रनाथ अश्क, भीष्म साहनी and Krishna Sobti, whom Geetanjali ji has called her guru. And in A Gujarat Here, A Gujarat There by Krishna Sobti, you mentioned that there is a certain Sobti lexicon, a certain Sobti logic that you were able to grasp in her presence. So how was your experience of Shree logic and Shree lexicon, and how is it different from the work? What newer challenges did it pose to you? And what was your overall experience of translating this novel?
Give me some earplugs.
Well, I think one difference is that I met Sobti before I translated the book and sat with her for several weeks. I mean, I came back to India and I spent a lot of time with Krishna Sobti. So I could sort of have an osmosis of her language and her worldview. Whereas Geetanjali, I did not get to meet until about 6 or 7 months ago. Because of the pandemic, I was planning to meet her. So I had to understand the Geetanjali lexicon and worldview by email, because we never Zoomed or anything like that. And that took a really, like, some of it I understood right away. Some of it we connected immediately, our sensibilities. And some of it she had to explain to me through really painstaking process of writing and emailing over and over again.
All right. I'll come to a question about which particular part was difficult to do over the email. I'll come to it, in some time. गीतांजलि जी, आपसे मेरा सवाल है, रेत समाधि में बेटे का आपने बड़े करके हमें बुलाया, बेटे के घर के दरवाजे का विवरण दिया है, और फिर भाग 2 में हम बेटी के घर आते हैं। बेटी के घर को आपने बेदरो दीवार बताया है। वहाँ पे जो बाँट भी हैं, जो सेक्शंस भी हैं, उसको आप खिलंदड़ी बाँट कहती हैं। डेजी जी ने उसको प्रेफुल पार्टीशंस बोला है। तो माँ अगेन एक जगह उन्होंने मुंह फेर लिया है, वो नहीं उठना चाहती हैं। दूसरी जगह वो धीरे धीरे उठती हैं। तो इसमें हम कोई यूनिवर्सल ट्रूथ पढ़ें कि बेटे और बेटी के घर में कुछ डिफरेंस हो सकता है एक बूढ़े माँ बाप के लिए, या ये उस कहानी का एक स्पेसिफिक डिटेल माना जाए?
मैं फिर कहूँगी कि आपको आइदर और करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है। देयर कैन बी डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ डॉटर्स, डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ सन्स। जहाँ तक एक स्टीरियोटाइप का सवाल है, ये फ़र्क आप एक स्टीरियोटाइप को मानते हुए देख सकते हैं। तो उस लिहाज से बेटे के घर का दूसरी तरह का वहाँ पे माहौल होगा, माँ की जगह दूसरी तरह की होगी, और बेटी का घर ख़ासकर उस किस्म की बेटी जिसने खुद कुछ सामाजिक नियम तोड़े हैं, तो वो घर एक दूसरे किस्म का रूपक बनेगा जो बेदरो दीवार का हो सकता है, जहाँ पर माँ ज़्यादा आज़ादी महसूस कर सकती है, नई शुरुआत हो सकती है। लेकिन मैं जो पहली बात मैंने कही उसी को दोहराऊंगी कि यू डोंट हैव टू सी इट एज आइदर और, इट कैन बी, इट इज़ अ स्टीरियोटाइप टू दैट एक्सटेंट, देयर इज़ अ सर्टन यूनिवर्सैलिटी और अ लार्जर सोशल ट्रूथ देयर, बट देयर इज़ ऑल्सो एन इंडिविजुअल साइड टू थिंग्स एंड देयर कैन बी डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ सन्स एंड डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ डॉटर्स।
जी बिल्कुल। मैं इसी से मेरा एक जुड़ता हुआ सवाल था कि उपन्यास के अंत में भी हम देखते हैं कि बड़े के दो बेटे हैं और वो आपस में बात कर रहे हैं कि अब खर्चा करना है, शायद केयरटेकर रखना पड़ेगा, और एक तरह की झकझक कर रहे हैं। आपको फिर शायद लगेगा कि मैं एक बाइनरी वाला सवाल पूछ रहा हूँ, पर ये ऑडियंस के लिए भी है। तो अगर दो बेटे ना हो और एक बेटी वहाँ पे हो, तो क्या ये सवाल सुलझता है, या जो वहाँ पे एंड में झकझक, एक आपने शब्द यूज़ किया है वहाँ पे,
ज़रूर सुलझता होगा या उलझता होगा दूसरे तरह से। पर अब कोई ऐसा तो नहीं है कि मैं एक किसी प्रॉब्लम को लेके चली कि इस प्रॉब्लम को सुलझाने का सबसे अच्छा तरीका कौन सा है, दो बेटे किरदार रहेंगे तो सबसे अच्छा रहेगा ये झकझक दिखाना। ऐसा तो नहीं सोच के चली हूँ। वो किरदार ज़्यादा ऑर्गेनिक तरह से कहानी में आए हैं, कहानी उनकी बनी है, तो चूँकि वो दो बेटे हैं तो एक ख़ास तरह से झकझक हो रही है। बेटा और बेटी होते ये स्पेकुलेशन के रेल्म की बात है, वो कहानी दूसरी तरह से बढ़ती, झकझक वहाँ भी होती और कोई सुलझाव वहाँ भी होता। आखिर बड़े और उसकी बहन में कोई है झकझक और कोई मतभेद और प्यार और शुबह सभी कुछ हैं, तो वो इसका कोई मतलब ये तो स्पेकुलेशन की बात हो गई ना। तो वो तो अब हमें देखना पड़ेगा कि जैसे है उसमें क्या क्या हो रहा है, वो वैसे ही होना था वैसे हो रहा है।
जी बिल्कुल। बड़े बेटी बहू ये शब्द जो रेत समाधि में है, ये टूम्ब ऑफ सैंड में नाम बन गए हैं, दे हैव बिकम नेम्स। सो फॉर एग्जांपल, आई मीन विद अ कैपिटल बी, and characters are called by those names. I watched a couple of YouTube reviews also of Tomb of Sand, and where, you know, an American reader or a British reader, for no fault of theirs, would call Betty Betty, you know. So, but I thought that was particularly clever. So could you, what sort of decision is that coming from a translator, and how do you arrive at that? And it also links with the larger number of kinship terms that we have in Indian languages.
Yeah, I think translating kinship terms is one of the biggest challenges, and I feel like it's actually a bigger challenge with women's writing than men's writing. So as many people know, I translated, I think, 3 or 4 books by men before I decided to only translate works by women. And one of the challenges I found when I switched genders is dealing with the kinship terms, because women's narratives tend to have a lot more relationship type of language going on about, because they're set much more inside of families. For example, you know, there's the classic male novel where the young man is sort of a flaneur, you know, he's wandering the streets, he's talking to his friends. So there are nicknames and family names and all different kinds of names. It's not just about who is Dadi, who is Nani, who is Bobby, and all these things. But when you come into women's writing, it's a lot more tricky, because there are often many characters that don't even have what we would consider in American terms like a name, like Bob or something like that, right? So, so in women's narratives, you have to figure out how to not to lose the flavor of family and kinship and relatedness, and this idea that every person is speaking to one another in a relational way. You can't lose it, but at the same time, you have to kind of tone it way down, or nobody's going to be reading it who doesn't understand these kinship terms already. So what I often do is I turn a kinship term into a name, so I capitalize it. So like Bhabhi, or I didn't have a Bhabhi here, I have Bahu and Bade and Beti. And then for the sons, I had serious son, and then Sid was always Sid. And Ma was Ma. So but they are capitalized, and they function as names, and I do not switch perspectives. So like, if somebody else thinks of Bahu as Bobby, I will not call her Bobby, I will say her sister-in-law. So I will kind of tone way down the number of relational terms, and then turn the main ones into actual names. And in fact, a lot of these characters don't have a name in the book, right? Except for Ma gets one at the end.
गीतांजलि जी, नॉवल के तीसरे भाग में सरहद पार होती है. पार्टीशन का कोई भी इवेंट आने से पहले एक पार्टीशन लिटरेचर को एक तरीके से आपने पहले चैप्टर में कई राइटर्स का आपने नाम लिया, कई उनके जो किरदार हैं वो भी जीवित हुए वहाँ पे. तो इसके पीछे आपका क्या ऑब्जेक्टिव था, क्या आप वहाँ पे करना चाहती थी उस चैप्टर में?
देखिए, आपकी जो टर्मिनोलॉजी है ना, वो मेरी नहीं है. तो मैं किसी ऑब्जेक्टिव के साथ तो ये सब नहीं कर रही थी, मगर कुछ एहसास होते हैं लिखने के दौरान, उस किस्से को कहने के दौरान, और उन एहसासों के चलते ये लेखक किरदार उसमें जगह पा जाते हैं. तो मैं कभी कभी सोचती हूँ, क्योंकि इस पर औरों ने भी थोड़ी जिज्ञासा व्यक्त की है, तो मुझे जो एक अनुभव अपना याद आता है वो वाघा बॉर्डर का ही था, जहाँ मैं भी गई थी वो वाघा सेरेमनी देखने, which as you know is a very, at some level, a very ridiculous ceremony, where the guards on both sides of the border are there to, almost in a parody act, to show each other their greater strength. So if one kicks up his leg, sort of up to his shoulder, the other one will kick it up above the head. So, there's a kind of ridiculous, almost like school brats fighting in the backyard game going on in there, looking threateningly at each other. So at that level, it's a completely ridiculous dance that is going on, and a ritual that is going on. And you can well imagine that these two guards, after this ceremony is over, will actually sit down together and have a cup of tea and pakoras and samosas and laugh. But what was happening to the public watching on either side was very sinister and very disturbing. I found it very disturbing, because on both sides there was such a jingoistic nationalism at play. And there's Pakistan Zindabad and Hindustan Zindabad, and obviously the sense of me stronger than you, me greater than you, or जहाँ तुमको रहना चाहिए अपनी औकात में रहो, sort of thing, which was very, very ugly. And I remember feeling quite disturbed by this display on either side. And I actually started sort of sometimes looking down with possibly even tears in my eyes. And I think that must have been the moment when all these writers started speaking to me. And these writers who did not recognize that border, who were very assertive about belonging to both sides of the border, or completely lost by what is going on and did not know which side of the border they belonged to. So that, I think that was the genesis of these writers walking into the book and, you know, saying something quite strong and moving to me.
Daisy, many of the writers that Geetanjali has named, you have translated. So you mentioned to me earlier also that you know, some of the passages or some of the quotations there, they became easier for you because you could just pick them from the other work that you have translated.
Copy paste.
Copy paste. But I'll talk about one that you have mentioned, one section that you have mentioned as particularly difficult to translate. There is this part where the human mind is called a jalebi. And there are two arguments happening there. One is that, you know, the mind is king and the rest of us, the rest of our body is just hanging like goop, राल की तरह टपके हैं. और दूसरा ये कि शरीर में भी बहुत मस्तिष्क होते हैं. तो उस पर्टिकुलर पैसेज की ट्रांसलेशन की क्या कहानी है, कैसे, क्या पर्टिकुलर डिफिकल्टी आपके लिए रही और कैसे वो आप दोनों ने रिजॉल्व की? क्वेश्चन डेजी के लिए भी है, गीतांजलि जी के लिए भी.
Well, I always tell Geetanjali that that was the hardest passage I'd ever translated. And it's hard to pinpoint what was so hard, but it's partly because it's sort of vague. It's funny, but it's vague. So she's saying all these, comparing the mind to a sweet, to jalebi, and the process that it works, and how maybe we have other minds that are like other sweets. And it's sort of ambiguous and vague, and I had to replicate that vagueness in English, but I also had to secretly know what she really meant, which meant I had to kind of continually pin her down over email, and it went back and forth and back and forth. Some like particular sentences we just went over and over and over and over, and then when I finally got away from that stage and started to polish it and edit it and kind of bring it further into English, I realized that it was just going to end up being this breezy, funny little passage, and I'm sure anybody that's read it, they may even be thinking, which part was that? Like, they probably don't even remember it that well because it's not important to the plot or anything like that. And it's, in fact, it's right before the Crows, which the Crows is the showstopper. So it's right before the Crows, and it's talking about Barde's memory and how the memory brings up these sardis and so on. So about how his kind of automatic memory. And so you don't even remember the jalebis because you get drawn into the sardis and the crows, which is such a huge memory for anybody reading the book. I don't know if Geetanjali wants to address the jalebis herself.
I'm not sure I can add very much to that, except that, you know, I think what often bothers me, and perhaps that's where the arts and literature step in, is how much importance we give to this thing called the brain, which we think is up here, and it is this jalebi-shaped brain. And actually, there's so much else in our being, which is a sensory organ, which is a brain, so to speak, with which we must enjoy and read and gauge the world. तो हमें अपनी दूसरी इंद्रियों का मज़ा और की वक़्त जाननी चाहिए. और ज़्यादातर हम हर चीज़ इस जलेबी शेप दिमाग से ही सोचते समझते हैं. एक और इंद्रिय का बहुत इस्तेमाल करते हैं जिसका मैं नाम नहीं लूँगी, लेकिन इन दो के अलावा हम अपने सेंसेस को बहुत ज़्यादा इम्पोर्टेंस नहीं देते हैं. सो आई थिंक दिस पैसेज केम आउट ऑफ दैट काइंड ऑफ impulse and desire to speak of the importance of enjoying things with all your brains and all your senses.
But it's also a visual image, a visual joke, that a jalebi in fact sort of looks like a cartoon drawing of the human brain, and of course that's what I love about it the most.
गीतांजलि जी, रेत समाधि में कई नरेटिव वॉइसेस आ जाती हैं. एक नरेटर मुझे थोड़ा ख़ास लगा, जो सिर्फ अकेला एक ऐसा नरेटर है जिसको आपने मैं बोलने की इजाज़त दी है, और दरअसल वो कहानी में है ही, मतलब वो कहानी का है ही नहीं, राइट. उसको अम्मा के पोते सिड का दोस्त है वो शायद. तो वह क्या है, क्यों है, मैं जानता हूँ मैं फिर से एक डिटर्मिनिस्टिक सवाल पूछ रहा हूँ, पर आई वॉन्ट टू हियर फ्रॉम यू एज टू हाउ दिस नरेटर केम टू बी.
पता नहीं कहाँ से आया, और इजाज़त उसने मुझसे नहीं ली, वो खुद ही अपने को मैं बोलने लगा. पर कहीं ना कहीं मुझे लगता है कि कहीं ना कहीं इस बात का मज़ा मैं भी ले रही हूँ और हम सब ले रहे थे जो उस कहानी को आगे बढ़ा रहे थे, कि हम अपने को बहुत ही सीरियसली भी लेते हैं और हम हैं भी नहीं उस कहानी के. तो उसका कुछ एक और इम्पॉर्टेंट है भी, आखिर विटनेस तो बहुत सी चीज़ें उसी ने की, तो है भी वो इम्पॉर्टेंट. लेकिन कहीं पर उसको ये भी एहसास है कि ही डजंट इवन बिलोंग टू द स्टोरी, and the story can go on without him. So there's something almost, I mean, it's all done in a very light, humorous way, but there's something, there's an existential sort of reality to it and a dimension to it, which I think kept me going.
नॉवल ख़त्म उसी नरेटर से होता है. उसी नरेटर की बात कर रहा हूँ डेजी जी. एक जगह पे जिस वाक्य से मैंने शुरुआत भी की, सब वेलकमिंगली बुलाते हैं तो हैप्पीली चला आता हूँ. Now for a translator, this sentence, the English words stay the same, the Hindi words become English, right? So it does not, therefore, you don't get the same sense that you get in Hindi. So how do you adjust to that? Because you're translating a larger work, there are, hundreds of pages. So I'm sure you are able to spot that. Here particularly, I'll just carry it as is, but elsewhere there may be something else that one can do as a translator to keep the entire,
Well, I think one of the things that translators do is to compensate. So if there's something we can't capture in one place, we try to capture it somewhere nearby. Now, I don't really know if I captured anything nearby that sentence or not, and sometimes things do get flattened out because this book is written about as people say, polyphonic soundscape. You've got language, all different kinds of languages happening all the time, even if it's primarily in Hindi. But it's also about an environment that is with constantly shifting languages. So English, especially outside of India, is much flatter in terms of linguistic diversity popping up in it. And so, what I've done with this translation is to keep alive some of that diversity, keep Hindi words popping up and Hindi cadences, or sort of literally translating some idioms rather than trying to domesticate them in translator language, turn them into something that already exists in English. And that creates its own topography, which even though to you, someone like you reading the translation, it might seem much flatter than the Hindi. For people that aren't familiar with this environment, it's actually sometimes overwhelming. I see a lot of reviewers and readers from UK and US saying this book was really, really hard for me because there was so much language I didn't understand. They're not used to that. They are not used to it. So I try to create the illusion of this topography rather than actually bringing it literally into English.
गीतांजलि जी, एक पैसेज आप अभी पढ़ना चाहेंगे या मैं महाभारत से जुड़ा हुआ एक पैसेज?
आप बॉस हैं या?
मैं चाहता हूँ कि आप पढ़ें।
अच्छा, तो मैं खड़े होकर पढ़ूंगी।
बिल्कुल। And Daisy, I would also like you to follow up on the translation.
हमने ये वाला टुकड़ा काफ़ी बार पढ़ा है, and some who have already heard it actually very categorically insisted that we should not read it. But we've decided to read it, believing that some of you may not have heard us before. So this is a little piece about the family and about the daily bickerings that go on in the family, which quite often are just rubbish and don't develop into anything very serious, but can. कहना चाहिए परिवार को जबकि कहते हैं महाभारत को कि जो दुनिया में वो उसमें और जो उसमें नहीं वो कहीं नहीं, कवि के तसव्वुर में भी नहीं। यानी भूला भटका आतंकवादी, गर्मा भरमा वामपंथी, नारीवाद और नारी हरवादी और जीती हारी सब परिवार में या महाभारत में जिसे जैसे रुचे पचे। महाभारत में दुनिया परिवार में, और इसलिए परिवार में महाभारत, जो रोज़ रोज़ के हंगाम हर एक महाभारत। इसलिए परिवार के हर सदस्य को पता है कि जो मुझ में वो किसी में नहीं, और जो मुझ में नहीं वो होने लायक नहीं। और ये कि मेरे पास दिमाग है, औरों के पास पैसा, और ये कि मेरा फ़ायदा उठाया सबने, अब हम नहीं बाकी करें। और ये कि हम दूर रह के भी रहम दिल, तुम वहीं हो पर कितने बेरुखे। और ये कि हमेशा हम ही देते हैं और आप हमेशा लेते हैं, और वाह आपकी सूझ जिसमें आप तो मिलनसार, हम वही तो मतलबी यार। और आप चुप तो विनयशील, हम चुप तो काइयाँ। आप करें सो शिष्टाचार, वही हम करें तो लल्लो चप्पो। आप कहें तो साफ गोई, हम कहें वही तो बदतमीज़। हम पूछ लें तो अश्लील जिज्ञासा, आप पूछें तो हमदर्दी। हम करें तो हमारी सुविधा, आप करें तो आपकी कृपा। हम करें तो कंजूस, आप करें तो किफ़ायती। हम चुप तो घमंडी, आप चुप तो शर्मीले। हम तो बड़े सीक्रेटिव, पर आप तो बस रिजर्व्ड। और हमारे फैशनेबल कपड़े नकल, आपके ज़माने से कदम ताल। और हमारा गया तो हूँ ऐसा क्या बवाल, आपका गया तो लुट गए हाय हाय। और हमने किया तो क्या किया, और आपका इरादा वो भी किया। यानी हम वो जो हमने किया, आप वो जो आपने सोचा। और हमने कहा तो कटाक्ष, आपने कहा तो मजाक। और हमने अपनी बताई तो मियाँ मिट्ठू, आपने बताई तो सहज सत्य। और हमने पा लिया तो हथियाया, आपने पाया तो आपका अधिकार। और हमने कहा तो हमारा गुमान, आपने कहा तो आप तो हैं ही सही। और हम गुस्साए तो ह्यूमर की कमी, आप गुस्साए तो आत्मसम्मान। और हम कर गए तो कर्तव्य था, आपने किया तो बड़प्पन हुआ। और हम सफल तो आपका सहारा जो मिला, और आप असफल तो हमने अड़ंगे जो डाले। और जी हम रह गए तो हम काहिल, आप रह गए तो आप त्यागी। और जी हम न समझे तो पैदल, आप नहीं तो भोले। और जी आपको हमसे वैर तो हम इसी लायक, हमको आपसे वही तो हम ईर्ष्यालु। और जी हमने किया तो स्वार्थ, आपने वही तो परमार्थ। और गर हम न करें तो बेपरवाह, मगर आप न करें तो मजबूरी। और हमने जितना किया सो कम, आपने ज़रा भी सो ज़्यादा। और हमारी नाक टेढ़ी तो बदसूरत, आपकी आँख टेढ़ी तो कलात्मक। और जी अपनी तस्वीर अच्छी तो फोटोग्राफर माहिर, आपकी अच्छी तो आप सुंदर। और जी हम गोरे तो छिली बटेर, आप सफ़ेद तो आप तो विलायती लगें। हम काले तो बैंगन भट्ट, जबकि आप काले तो ब्लैक इज़ ब्यूटीफुल। हम मोटे तो खाऊ पेटू, आप मोटे तो रौनक चमक, हम दुबले तो सूखी लकड़ी, आप सीख तो सौम्य सजिल, और हम चलाएं एसी तो अय्याश, आप चलाएं तो सेहत नाजुक, हम पिएं तो शराबी, आपने पी तो डॉक्टर की हिदायत, हमारी ज़बान अंग्रेज़ी तो शो ऑफ हम, आपकी तो शिक्षित आप, अच्छा आपकी ज़रूरत तो हम एक परिवार, हमारी ज़रूरत तो आप अलग और अकेले, हम शरीफ तो मुलम्मा, आप वही तो ख़ानदानी, और जी आपका काम काम और हमारा काम तमाम। शुक्रिया।
Okay, English now. Anything we say about the Mahabharata could also be said about families. They contain all that exists in the world, and whatever they don't contain doesn't exist, not even in the imagination of a poet. That is, the gone astray terrorist, the hot-headed leftist, the female and the feminist, the everythingist and the opti-pessimist, all in the family, or in the Mahabharata, whichever you prefer. The world is in the Mahabharata, the world is in the family, and thus the Mahabharata is in the family. The daily flare-ups, each one a Mahabharata. For this reason, every member of the family knows that what exists in me exists in no one else, and what does not exist in me has no call to exist, and that I have the brain, others have the money, and that everyone has taken advantage of me, so from now on I won't do anything, let the rest of them do it. And that I'm the most tender-hearted despite living far away, while you are right here, yet so completely inconsiderate. And I'm always the giver, and you are always the taker. And wow, your wheeling dealings are just because you're such a friendly soul, but if I do the same, I'm cold and calculating. When you're quiet, you're polite, but when I'm quiet, I'm wily. If you did it, it's good etiquette. If I do, it's fawning flattery. If you say it, it's candid. If I do, it's just rude. If I ask, it's obscene curiosity. When you do, it's sympathy. If I do it, it's for my own convenience. If you do it, you're most beneficent. If I do it, I'm being stingy. If you do it, you're being thrifty. If I'm quiet, I'm acting proud. If you're quiet, you feel bashful. I'm extremely secretive, but you're just reserved. My fashions are faux, whereas yours are cutting edge. And if I lose something, what's the big deal? But if you do, you've been robbed, woe is me. And if I do something, it amounts to nothing, but your merest intention of doing something amounts to actually doing it. That is, I am what I've done, you are what you've thought. And what I said was scornful, but what you said, it was just a joke. When I said my piece, I was being a show-off, but when you had your say, it was the unvarnished truth. And if I got it, I grabbed it, but if you got it, it was your right. And if I said it, I was deluded, but if you said it, you were just right. And when I get angry, I'm humorless, but when you do, it's self-respect. And when I went and did it, it was my duty, but when you did, it was big of you. And when I'm successful, I got help from you, but when you're unsuccessful, it was me who threw a spanner in the works. And if I get stuck, I'm a slacker. And if you get stuck, you blew your chances. And oh yes, if I don't get it, I'm a moron, but if you don't, you're innocent. And oh yes, if you're enemies with me, I deserve it. But if I am with you, I'm jealous. And oh yes, if I did it, I'm self-serving. If you did, you're self-effacing. And if I don't do it, it's carelessness. But if you don't, it's helplessness. And however much I've done is not enough, and whatever little you did is plenty. And my nose is crooked. If my nose is crooked, it's ugly. And if your eye is crooked, it's artistic. And oh yes, if I look good in a picture, the photographer was gifted. But if you look good, it's because you're beautiful. And, oh yes, if I'm fair, I look like a skinned quail. And if you're pale, you look like a foreigner. If I'm dark, I'm Mr. Eggplant Head, whereas when you do, black is beautiful. If I'm fat, I'm Tubby Tubkins. If you're fat, you're pleasingly plump. If I'm thin, I'm dry as a stick. If you're skinny, you're svelte and shapely. And if I turn on the AC, I'm decadent. But if you do, you suffer from delicate health. When I drink, I'm a drunk. When you drink, doctor's orders. If I speak in English, I'm giving myself airs. If you do, you're educated. Oh, and if you need it, we're all one big family. But when I need it, you're separate and alone. If I'm polite, it's pretentious. If you are, it's pedigree. If I live by the fruits of my labor, I'm a crude drudge. But when you cling like a leech, it's a cultural custom. And yes, your work is the bee's knees, but mine's a hobby, if you please.
कुछ मिनटें हमारे पास बाकी हैं, अगर ऑडियंस से कोई सवाल है तो
Hi. Yeah. Hi, I'm Ritesh. I have questions for three of you actually. First question is to Tanuj. I was just thinking about it. When you were asking questions to Geetanjali ma'am, it almost felt like you were coming from a very thriller perspective about having a very deterministic answers to everything. I just wanted to know if that was something that you were thinking. To Daisy ma'am, I was floored by the poetry, like it flows like a river, the Hindi book. So I was wondering, how did you go about that, and if you tried to replicate that in English version? Do I wait?
I was busy posing for a photograph, sorry.
Yeah. For Geetanjali ma'am, I wanted to ask you about this. There's an almost Proustian quality to your prose. It just stands still and you can feel every moment passing by. Like you don't care about the plot, what's going on. Like I think for several pages, there's nothing happening. You just enjoy what's happening in that particular moment. There's a door, there's character. You're just enjoying that. Just wanted to know about how that writing process, and what do you think when you're writing? Like
I hope you're not asking me a deterministic question as
I
well.
hope not. I really hope not.
But you know, I mean, think of. I don't know. There can be different reasons why a person writes certain things in a certain way, and to the extent that I didn't do it with a formula in mind, I won't be able to give a very clear answer. But you know, think of something like classical music, where alap खूब देर तक चलता है और तकरीबन कुछ नहीं होता है, बिल्कुल लगता है कि नोट्स ठहरे हुए हैं एक ही जगह पे और वहीं पे बस वो तिर रहे हैं और तैर रहे हैं, और बहुत ही धीरे 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 आपको ये एहसास होता है कि जहाँ शुरू किया था उससे कहीं हम आगे बढ़े हैं, और फिर इट बिल्ड्स अप यू नो सॉर्ट ऑफ मोमेंटम, और उसमें गत भी शुरू हो जाती है, दूसरी ताने भी शुरू हो जाती हैं. तो कुछ एक स्ट्रक्चर कोई भी कृति कुछ हद तक अपने आप इवॉल्व करती है और तय करती है, और उसकी अपनी मांग होती है कि इस तरह से करो, उस तरह से वो बनता चला गया.
I had a question. I mean, he asked me a question too, which was about replicating the rhythm and the musicality of the text. And I wanted to say that although this is called a novel, it's in some ways a prose poem, the whole book. And I had to translate it as poetry the whole time.
अच्छा, मैंने डिटर्मिनिस्टिक क्वेश्चन क्यों पूछे? इसका मेरे पास डिटर्मिनिस्टिक आंसर नहीं है.
Ma'am, in the very early part of the novel, ma'am, in the very early part of the novel, the character of the mother is very depressed, and she is saying no to everything, every command, everything, and the daughter is saying why the word no is coming from my mother, because this is my word. The no word is my word. Why is coming from my mother? So this is so relatable in a mother-daughter relationship. And I just wanted to ask a very, very simple question, that where this vivid imagery came from, because it's very relatable.
I mean, I think it's a very common image, isn't it? You know, just the elderly looking very fed up with life, or looking rather sort of vacant about their own selves and about, you know, any purpose in their lives. So I think that's a very common image which all of us see, you know, so often. And so that image, I mean, I don't think I really have to look far to find that. But I think the other one which we often miss out on is the image of the image or the reality of the Hindi mein shabd hai na jijivisha, the lust for life that anyone may have at any age. And in fact, a lot of so-called elderly people are full of that. Krishna Sopti being one great example, you know, to the last days in the hospital, you know, where she was fully alert, her body was completely failing, but she was as alive as could be. And she was joking about herself, and she would say, oh, thodi flight thodi delay ho gayi hai. Phir se delay ho gayi hai, she would say. So she could go on like that, you know, and she's not the only one. So I think somewhere this love for life, I mean, till you are dead, you are not dead. Till you are dead, you are alive. And I think that was inspiring me, and does inspire me in lots of people around me. Yeah.
Hello, right in front. Hi. Firstly, thank you for an amazing session. Thank you for creating a fantastic book with a fantastic translation. My question is for both of you. English का India में एक बहुत interesting status है. It's a status symbol. It's also colonialism की एक वसीयत है हमारे लिए, English as a language. और ये किताब it's a love letter to Indian languages, to South Asian languages. तो उसका हिंदी में होना, उसका जो भाषाओं का खेल है उस किताब में, वो बहुत appropriate है. तो उसको इंग्लिश में लाना, स्पेसिफिकली इंग्लिश एज अ लैंग्वेज में लाना, उसके बारे में अगर आप कुछ बोल सके, उस प्रोसेस के बारे में, उसके क्या ख्याल था पीछे, वो मैं जानना चाहूँगी, अगर आप शेयर करना चाहेंगे तो. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to ask that question, and it's a question that I think about a lot when I'm translating into English, because I don't see it as a simple process. It might be, you know, if I was translating from French into English or German into English, it would be much more straightforward relationship expressing itself. But because of the colonial legacy and because of the way that education prioritizes English here, in the sense that English is the language you need to get ahead, it's and then, of course, it's the global imperialism of English, you know, post-colonialism. It's a really big responsibility to bring anything into this language without being aware of what you're doing. And I stay conscious of it all the time, and I think something I always put in my introductions and my afterwards and my translator's notes is, if you liked this, if this book made you curious, and if you already know that language somewhat, I want you to go back and read the book in the original. Now you have help. If it's hard for you to read in Hindi, you've got a crutch here in this book, and you can go back. You've got a bridge, not a crutch, a bridge. So I think that's really important for translators to keep in mind, particularly in this kind of post-colonial setting, is to not use your language to efface the original, but to bring the original alive.
With this, we wrap the last session for today. We would like to thank Geetanjali Shree, Daisy Rockwell, and Tanuj Solanki for this insightful discussion. We thank Dainik Bhaskar for their support. Please join me in giving a warm round of applause to esteemed guests. Geetanjali Shree and Daisy Rockwell will be signing books at the book signing desk located at the kiosk on my right-hand side.